This is a Waeco CFX. It's a little camping fridge. It runs off 12 or 220 volt. The plug for the power is on this side. There's an outlet for 12 or 220 volt. And it's got a little display here for adjusting the temperature. You can set it, it's on -22, but you can set it to whatever you want to, warm or cold, and it should maintain this temperature. But this one, for some reason, if you set it on a certain temperature and you leave it and you come back in 20 minutes, it set itself, the temperature just goes out. So if you want to use it as a fridge, you go above freezing where it's now, so on 1 degree. It will run to 1 degree cycle once or twice, and then eventually it will just go back to -17 or -19, whatever the maximum is. So the temperature controller loses its memory, and I spoke to the agents that import these. There's no parts available, and apparently a lot of these do that. So we can't buy the electronic board. I've opened it a bit. It's full of electronics inside. But I've got this. It's a Danfoss 12 volt controller, and I'll see if I can fit this in here instead of this to control the temperature. Once you've opened it and had a look at what's inside here, there's not actually much space to put this controller in here. I suppose if I take this board out, we can put it in here, but I'd like to keep that control board in there. This thing has got a function with the little light inside which sits there, and I don't see any light switch whatsoever. On the older models it had a little plunger that when you close the lid it would switch the light on and off, but this one obviously doesn't have it, and the light does work. So I'd like to keep all these electronics in there to have the light working. Now if I cut a little square hole in the front here and put it in here, now the fridge part only goes as far as here, so there's nothing here. So I was thinking of cutting a nice little hole in here and then sliding this controller in there, and in the bottom it's all, I can cut a little hole and let the wires come out there. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I've connected the wires onto the controller now. That blue and brown one, according to the diagram, that's your power, 12 volt, to make the controller work. These two purple ones is the switch wire, and the very end one is the sensor, which I've cut off. This is the sensor from the old PC board, which starts there, so I've just connected it onto the controller. So I'll put power, 12 volt power, onto these two wires and just see if the controller likes that sensor. Otherwise we'll have to change the sensor. I've just connected the power wires for the controller temporary, and when I put it on it was just flickering. Now it shows temperature, but it's not compatible with the sensor that's in there. So I've got original Danfoss sensor, which I'm going to have to replace. It fits down there, but it does show ambient temperature, which is 21 degrees. I heard the relay click inside, so the switch works. So the next step is to replace the sensor. The old controller just show an error because I've cut the sensor wire off. I got lucky with this sensor. This is the old sensor, and I took that black glue off, and I just pulled out the little head on this one. It's a little bit smaller, so that other one was quite tight, but I forced it down the hole, so I've replaced it now with a compatible sensor. Now the sensor is mounted, and it's showing the ambient temperature here. Now I'm getting 12 volt from the Danfoss, or this is a C-Cop controller there, and I've got two 20-volt mains plugged into it now, and this controller acts as a power supply as well that takes the 12-volt AC down to, the 220-volt AC down to 12-volt DC for all these electronics to work. Now I just want to plug a 12-volt lead in and see if it still does the same. Then I can permanently connect the two power wires for the controller. I've connected 12-volt onto it. So obviously the electronics get their 12-volt, but controller is dead, so it doesn't like where I've connected my 12-volt. So I'll have to look for another source of 12-volt for the controller. I've connected the controller now. The positive is on that red wire, and there's like a little blue wire which I've put a negative to, and if I put it onto 220-volt, it lights up and the controller seems happy. Switch it off, then the controller and everything is off. And if I switch the 12-volt on, okay, now it's on the 12-volt, the display shows, and this works. So I'm going to permanently connect my controller's power onto those two wires, and then these two purple wires I will use to break and make the compressor, and we'll see once the compressor runs and I still get 12-volt from that connection, then the controller can control everything. Now I've made permanent connections there for the power onto the controller. These two purple wires is the switch bit for the controller, and normally on this Danfoss contact C, T and C is the switch part. So I'll disconnect the two wires that's marked T and C and plug those two in. That will switch the compressor on and off. I've put the two purple wires on T and C. I've plugged it in. The thing shows the ambient temperature. I heard the little relay go click, but the compressor is not starting up. So I must just look a little bit further to see why it doesn't run. If I put a little bridge piece across T and C, compressor starts up and runs. And that is what our controller should do. On the diagram, it does show the switch bit. Don't know if it focuses. So I must have a look at my controller switch. But the compressor is running now with the bridge piece. This thing here, so I must have misread the diagram, because on the diagram it shows contact 3 and 4 as a switch, and on the end here it's got something that says room. This side it also shows a little switch, so the switch is not there, the switch is here. So I've connected it up now. Now the compressor runs. So I'm just going to put it back in its casing again, and then we'll mount it. Okay, there it's assembled, so I'll connect the wires back on again. 12 volt positive. Volt negative. This is the one switch wire. Switch wire and the 2 wires for the sensor. So I'm not sure what those middle connections are for. Doesn't want to go in. Okay, let's switch it on and see. This is the plug to my power supply, which makes it run on 12 volt. Okay, now it says, oh, wait, hold on, there's something very wrong here. Okay, this top button was pushed all the time because of the way the cover was fitted. So now the 2 buttons move freely. Let's try again. Here's my 12 volt power supply. 14 degrees. Click goes the relay. And the compressor starts up. So now it's running. So now I will control the temperature on this. Just have a look on this side. On this side, this is the original display. It shows 26 degrees, which is our room temperature here in the shop at the moment. But by pushing that button and holding it, we switch it off. And even if it's off, the light inside still works. So there's a little light that shines. And when you close the lid, the light works. So that's the only reason why I kept the existing board. Now on this controller, it's been on for a while and it gives off a little bit of heat. So I was worried about this little hole I made being insulated and the heat. So I just dug all the foam out right to the bottom and this fits in there nicely. Now originally Danfoss had these little clips that slide in there, and from the back you have to push it to make this stay in there, but there's no way I'll get in behind to put it in. So what I'll do is I'll just put a little bit of glue or epoxy on it and glue this into position like that, and that's how it's going to stay. And this is going to control everything, and then I'll assemble everything. I'll show you once it's assembled. I've put all the covers together and I've put a little bit of glue onto the controller. So that's in position now. And then here's the 2 plugs. Now the AC port, the 220 volt, is just a plug. It plugs in there. and you plug that onto the 220 volt. And then it starts up. It's on 6 degrees now. That little light illuminates when it's in the on position, so it runs. And then on the 12 volt, this is these two connections here. Now Waeco makes a plug that you plug in there, and then you plug it into your car cigarette lighter, but I haven't got one of those. So what I do is I'll just put these two terminals with the positive to the bottom and the negative to the top. So I'll just plug it in like that. Just so it's there. So okay, so now this is my 12 volt power supply. So if we switch the mains off, then the display goes blank, and then we plug in our 12 volt. And then it will switch on there, and then the little light lights up, so it means it's running. And this display, this sensor, I've mounted it inside, so it will obviously show higher than room temperature because there's a lot of heat from the compressor, but I don't really care what that shows because that doesn't control anything on the fridge. All your controls are through this, and to adjust on the temperature here, you push both buttons at the same time for 3 seconds, and it will go to a setting mode, and then you can go either colder or warmer, and when you find a temperature you just press both buttons again. And that is how I remove the original operating system of this Waeco fridge to a second one. And if this controller ever fails, you can just replace it with any digital controller.